now let's draw an object with a few additional complications. It has a complicated shape, it's also relatively dark. I think probably in this case it's best to get the proportions of the body of the object before drawing the handles. So let's see how many times the width fits into the height. I'm measuring at the widest part, and it looks like the width fits 1 and maybe 1/6 into the height. Let's sketch in a rectangle. Looks about the same, so this is 1, this is about 1/6. Now we're dealing with mostly a symmetrical object. The lip is slightly warped, but I think in this case, because most of the object is symmetrical, I'm going to draw a plumb line. Let's figure out where the object is at its widest. It looks like it's right about here, like this. We can figure out how wide the base is. That's something that's also measurable. So here's the top of the object. The bottom, I notice, is more or less elliptical. So it's going like this. And then it looks like the lip and the width of the object at its widest part is about the same. So we have an ellipse down here that gets flattened a little bit and then rises up ever so slightly. Like that. Then the object goes in this way, then goes out, and then comes right back in on itself. In fact, it looks like here we have almost a rounded shape, if I'm not mistaken, like this. And then the bottom ellipse needs to be a little bit curvier than this one. Not by much, because this object is actually really small and fairly short. Okay, so now we have this sketched in. Let's go in and put in a slightly stronger contour line. Alright, this looks pretty good. Now let's get the handles. So let's do a little bit more information gathering. Let's figure out where the handles start. They start right about here. Let's figure out how tall this handle is. By using a horizontal alignment, it looks like the top of the handle on the right runs a little tiny bit shorter than this part right here, like this. Let's figure out where this little curlicue ends. It looks like it runs slightly below the lip here, like this. And then probably the most important thing is how far it extends. So let's measure from here to here, and then compare it against something we've already drawn. So it looks like the distance from here to here is about the same distance as this. So you can see we've drawn a little rectangle here, and now we can follow it and get the correct curvature. It starts going in this way. Guys, don't forget to sketch. Use a really light line at the beginning. I'm probably going in a little bit darker than I normally would. Again, I'm afraid you guys can't see this. Graphite's slightly reflective. So I want to make sure that this is super clear. Okay, that looks okay. Okay, not great. Okay, let's deal with the other side. So I noticed on this side, the handle comes out a little bit higher than on this side, right about here. Let's see what the width is here. From here to here. Actually very similar to the width here, so I can compare that. So that's going to come out to here. And then let's figure out how high up it is. It looks like it hovers ever so slightly over the top, like this. Okay, so now that we know the starting point, we know the end point here, that's going to help us build the contour. By the way, we're also talking about negative spaces, looking at negative spaces to get things right. So the space here, for instance, is going to be really important for getting the drawing right. The negative space here, this little comma shape, also really important. Look for the holes. Look at the holes. That's going to help you get the positive spaces correct. Okay, so we're ready to shade this thing. A few added complications. This thing is really, really dark. It's slightly shiny, and the light break is a little bit hard to see. But let's go through this. We have a cast shadow that's being cast from the lip here onto the object. Here's our cast shadow. Going this way, it goes down, and then we've got a round shape here. It's lit from the same exact light angle as our other two objects. Our light break is going to have a very similar shape. This is where knowing something to be true really helps us see it correctly. We've got a dark object, it's slightly reflective, it's hard to see the light breaks quite often, but we know that our light break is going to be similar in shape to a sphere. And if we look closely, we can see it. Again, sometimes we need to know that something is there in order to detect it. Okay, so we found our light break. Let's indicate the shape of our highlight. We've got a few other highlights here. These probably can be erased out later. We're going to ignore them for right now. Okay. We've got an object with a really dark local value. The first step is to separate the highlights from the lights and go really dark in the local value. So go through the range of pencils. Don't start off with your 4B pencil, even though the object is really dark. And knock this down a lot. All these highlights can be put in after the fact. They can be erased out. However, you'll find that if you leave the whites alone, they're going to end up brighter than if you erase them out later. Right? The paper always stains a little bit. You can always see when an artist erased out, as opposed to reserving the whites, leaving the whites where they actually need to be. Okay, so here we're going to go really dark. What you're looking for is a value that's so dark that our highlight glows. We've got a white, bright, glowing highlight. Probably in this case, it helps to initially put in your light breaks a little bit stronger than you would on a white object, because if they're too pale at the beginning, they're going to disappear underneath the local value. Okay, so our highlight is starting to glow. This might be a really good starting point. So the next step is probably to switch to your darker pencil. I'm going to switch to my 4B. Here's my 4B. And start indicating your shadow. So here we have a cast shadow. It needs to have a sharp edge. That cast shadow is going to flow into a body shadow, which has a soft edge. What did I forget to do? I forgot to indicate the shape of my cast shadow. Let me do that in a second. Go a little bit darker here. By the way, to stabilize my hand, I'm letting my hand rest either on my knuckle or my fingertip. Alright, what else? We have a shadow here. That's something we forgot to do. Let's put that in. We might as well shade the handles right now. Again, those little sharp highlights, a little bit hard to reserve. You can do it, it's possible. Let's try doing it here. Okay. But like I said, I can fill in the entire local value and just erase it out after the fact. In fact, let's do that right now on this. So we went dark. And now I can get out my little eraser holder and erase out the highlight. Look, the problem is, particularly the 8B pencils, they're going to be hard to erase, they're going to smear. So really try to erase out pretty early when you're still dealing with a 2B pencil, a 4B pencil. Otherwise, once there's a lot of buildup of graphite, your eraser, the hard erasers won't work particularly well. You can adjust the value, you're not going to be able to erase it out to pure white. Okay. So let's start going darker. Because we're dealing with a dark object, I've already exhausted the value potential of my 4B pencil. So we're going to switch to 6B. We might, by the way, we might need an 8B pencil for this. I have one on hand. However, the 6B pencil should be able to go dark enough for just about everything. It's just going to take longer to get there. So once again, we're dealing with a dark object. The light break is not particularly clear. The core shadow is not particularly clear either. It's still there though. Look for it. There's a darker value that's running along the length of the light break. Everywhere there's a body shadow, there has to be a core. Otherwise, our forms do not look three-dimensional. It has to be there. Okay. Now, notice, we're dealing with a reflective object. There's some reflections in there. If you look closely, ignore them at the beginning. It's the same way you ignore the texture. We ignore the texture of the tangerine until we get to almost the finishing stage in our object. Your first priority always, regardless of texture, regardless of reflection, is to make sure that the object looks round. That is always a priority. Look, even when you're dealing with color, the first priority is three-dimensionality. Right? Does the object feel round? Only once the object feels three-dimensional do you start dealing with either texture or color or reflection. So we're going to start going really, really dark. We're going to start building up the core shadow. And I think a while ago I told you guys I forgot to put in the cast shadow. I still haven't done it. Let's do that. It's going this way. We can measure the distance. We can figure out where the tip is. I'm just going to sketch it in really quickly. It's going like that and like this, I think. Let's go through our range of pencils. So you never want to just shade with your 6B pencil. That would be a mistake. This is a 4B. Let's start shading with a 2B. If you start shading with an 8B, it's going to make the drawing look really rough. And so because your 2B pencils are a little bit harder, they fill in the grooves of the pencil, grooves of the paper a little bit more effectively, whereas the really soft pencil will just sit on the ridges of the paper and give you a really rough texture. So always go through the range of pencils when you're shading. 2B to 4B, really HB. Okay, so it goes really dark here. Okay, now that I made the shadow dark, I realize that the side here is reflecting the shadow back in on itself and getting really dark here. By the way, you can always switch to your writer's script to put in some details, to put in some sharp edges. So for instance, this kind of stuff can be done with your writer's grip. Alright, so once again, I've shaded a little bit. Now that I've made the shadows really dark, I realize that the lighter area could go a little bit darker. At this stage, I can start putting in halftones. But our object has achieved enough three-dimensionality, enough form, that we can start focusing a little bit on the reflective nature of the material. So let me go a little bit darker, I think, and then we'll start dealing with reflections. So there's a darker reflection going here, right? Now we can put that in. Let's switch to my 6B. We're going to start talking about how to deal with really reflective objects soon. But when an object is semi-glossy, right, not perfectly reflective, it's still going to be subject to the same rules of light logic as your matte objects. Once object becomes really shiny, then the rules go away. Right? You can no longer see the light breaks, forms start reflecting. That's something we'll start dealing with later, not right now. Reflective objects have their own rules that we have to follow. Again, notice that I'm shading a little bit everywhere. I'm not stuck at any one spot. I'm constantly bouncing back and forth between my shadows, my lights, my cast shadow, right? Okay, I think this demo's gone on long enough. So I'm going to stop now.